The sound, he smiled and beckoned her over. Hua Yu saluted, and then squatted obediently to support the lady's knee, letting her rub her hair on her temples. Magnolia is open again. Zhuang's mood is very good, today is a good day. Yes, Mrs. Han and Miss Han arrived at the hour, the inner and outer courtyards have been cleaned, and 5 types of refreshments have been prepared in the kitchen. The slave has inquired about it, and Miss Han is good at danking, so the gift is the general's calligraphy. Hua Yu smiled and frowned, because of this calligraphy, the slaves often go to the general to make trouble. Mrs. Zhuang laughed straight and stretched out her index finger, "You little girl is really clever, you can hit the general with your idea, it is considered that you have the ability and can get it, if I ask him, I won't necessarily give it." The index finger was crooked. Hua Yu hurriedly stood up, brought the tip of her nose close to receive this, and then smiled more happily, "The general also misses you, so he spared the slave's life." The screen of the hall has been erected, and the courtesy to Mrs. Han has not been dropped. What other orders do you have? Zhuang Shi nodded with satisfaction, pulled her up to dress herself, and smiled at the bronze mirror. What else can you order? Your arrangements must be well thought out. Hua Yu smiled, picked up the hosta to put it on for her, and adjusted her skirt. Is different. She has a big trouble. Right. Touching the hairpin on the dressing table, Zhuang suddenly thought. Jing Yong got up. Speak of trouble. Hua Yu smiled, her heart was full of anger. If it weren't for the birth of such a messed up life as Li Jingyun, Zhuang's family would be so angry that it would be hard to sleep every 3 days and take medicine for food. Will praise young master is amazing, it stands to reason that with such a child, Zhuang's life should be very good. But it is a pity that this son and Zhuang were born in conflict, not close when urinating, and when he grew up, he was always disobedient. Zhuang's beloved son couldn't bear to blame, and Li Jingyun was even more so. Today is the day to meet Miss Han. This fellow wanted to leave the house in the middle of the night. Fortunately, she responded in time and sent someone to guard it. But this cannot be said to Mrs. Before I came here, the servant asked someone to ask. Hua Yu smiled, there is a rumor in the east courtyard that the sun got up early in the morning. This is rare. Mr. Zhuang was delighted, then you can send him the bird's nest stewed in the kitchen first. I don't have to worry about it here, just let Zhuang Zhang serve. Yes. Hua Yu bowed her eyes and exited the main house door. Back to the office, more than 20 guards in the yard watched, and the guard did not change for 3 hours. Where's the backyard wall? Where are the minions in the son's yard? It's all thrown into the woodshed. Very good. Recovering a kind smile, Hua Yu folded her hands in front of her belly, and took someone to deliver bird's nest with confidence. Chi, the road is 1 zhang high. Caillou confidently stepped into the main house in the east courtyard. Then froze at the door. Caillou gestured a human figure in the air, and then dropped her fingers. A sarcastic smile. Hua Yu smiled and nodded, then reached out and dragged the guard by the door, gritted her teeth, "This is the young master you've been jailed for." The guard blushed because of her strangulation. Yin. Steward Yin, we really have been watching. Throwing him away, Hua Yu walked to the window and gently pushed. The training ground is not a good place. Passing by can be a bit irritable. If it comes to the day of taking a break, even half a person in this world will not be seen. However, Li Jingyun felt comfortable. Tianzhan Mountain was far away, the vast land of yellow sand, and even the dusty wind blowing over, was the smell of freedom. He took a deep breath, kicked the weapon rack with his toes, grabbed the spear that flew out, and pointed at the lieutenant next to him. A fight. Lieutenant General Qin Sheng surrendered, please enlighten me. The swords are all sharpened, and there is no love between them. Qin Sheng believed that his talent was outstanding and his skills were not weak, but he could not gain the upper hand against this young master who was dressed in brocade and jade. When Hua Yu saw the crowd from a distance, she knew that the evil obstacle was definitely here. She took 3 or 2 steps to push aside the soldiers, and was about to attack, when she saw the flower spear slashing on the sword's edge. Sparks splashed, and Jin Ming was deafening. Hua Yu was startled. There were cheers from all around. Li Jingyun smiled, and was about to say concede, but when he looked up, he saw Yin Huayu standing among a group of recruits. She must be dazzled. How could she find this place? Li Jingyun pulled Qin Sheng and walked in the opposite direction. What's going on at your house lately? He asked as he walked. That's right, I'll go back with you later. The footsteps stopped. Qin Sheng was helpless. Master, are you leaving the house without authorization? Joke. Li Jingyun snorted coldly. The general's mansion is my home. I just came out for a visit. Why did I say it without authorization? Does Mr. Yin know about this? Don't look away, Li Jingyun said vaguely. Of course she knows. When the voice fell, the two of them bypassed the echo wall and bumped into a group of people standing at the intersection. The headed one had folded his hands in front of his belly, and his face was cold and cold. The thunder was too fast to steal the bell. Li Jingyun dragged Qin Sheng back to the back of the echo wall. Qin Sheng was strangled by him and rolled his eyes. Young master. What are you afraid of? That's Steward Yin. It's because she is afraid. Bah, I'm not afraid. What's a slave to be afraid of? Li Jingyun just felt annoyed. How could there be someone like Yin Huayu in the world, with a nose like a dog? No matter where he ran, she could find him quickly. The training ground looks like it can't stay. Go. My son will take you to Kifeng Tower to play today. Qin Sheng wondered, didn't you say that Mr. Yin knew that you came out? Stop talking. Oh. Turning her head and running in the direction of the stables, Li Jingyun hurriedly unfastened the reins, but as soon as he stretched out his hand, a man appeared next to him, lightly helping him. Slim and clean. Young master. Hua Yu smiled softly and pleasantly. The general has an order, please go home immediately. The sand swept through the stable, and the horse snorted. The hay in the trough exudes a strange aroma, and the surroundings are silent. Li Jingyun took a half step back calmly, but the person next to him reacted more than him, and followed him back 2 steps, and more than 10 guards rushed up behind him. After a moment of silence, Li Jingyun turned his head, as if he had just seen her. Suddenly, look at my memory, there is still something in the house today. Turned to Qin Sheng again and said, knowing that the house is busy recently, why do you still take your father to Kifeng Tower? Qin Sheng. Hua Yu nods her head, tactfully and docilely, without any intention of questioning, she just bends her knees sideways. Master, please mount. Li Jingyun nodded cheerfully, took the reins, and then tugged at the placket. I've been exercising just now, and I'm sweating a lot. Caillou looked at him with a smile. If the average person continued the sentence, then he said that he would bathe and change clothes at the training ground and wait for an opportunity to run away, but Yin Huayu smiled and nodded, as if saying, edit, you continue to edit. Li Jingyun felt very annoying and couldn't make it up. Let's go. He got on his horse and looked back at her. Did you bring someone by car? Flower Moon nodded. Then come up, Lord will take you back. He smiled and stretched out his hand. The carriage is so slow, if they can't make it back, they will blame me. Isn't it your fault? Hua Yu was so angry that the general's mansion had been busy for 3 days. Even the old man who looked at the back door knew that the Han family was coming today. How could this man with a good memory have really forgotten? But she is a slave after all. No matter how angry she is, she can only laugh, grab his hand and sit on the back of the horse, clutching the saddle tail tightly. Sit firmly. Yu Guang glanced back. Li Jingyun caught the horse's belly, the horse neighed, and galloped towards the road. The surrounding scenery quickly regressed, the wind was blowing so that people could not open their eyes. Hua Yu frowned repeatedly. Sir, slow down. Isn't it in a hurry? Li Jingyun sighed, look at what the weather is like, no matter how slow you are, you will lose your courtesy. Hua Yu smiled and gritted her teeth, clutching the saddle as if competing with him, trying not to let herself fall off the horse. After 2 sticks of incense, the horse slowed down, and Hua Yu finally had time to open her eyes, but when she opened her eyes, she almost fell. Master, this is not the way back. Li Jingyun pulled back and looked left and right. It's not this one. Which one is that? Caillou is going to be pissed. The sun has risen, and it is time for the Han family to pass the house. The master is not here, and she is not here. How should the lady deal with it? Sir, please dismount. I dismount. Li Jingyun dawdled on the reins. Do you know the way? This rogue looks like a different person from the one who wields a gun on the battlefield. Hua Yu sighed. She was too lazy to talk to him. She hooked up with her right leg and kicked the toe of his shoe, kicked him out of the stirrup, then stepped on her own strength and propped herself up. The left leg crossed over his head and sat down in front of him. The light grey skirt fell over her head and fell in front of her. Li Jingyun only felt a pain in the back of her hand, and the reins were in her hands. Drive! The horse's head turned and galloped away. Li Jingyun was a little stunned. This action was too fast. He didn't react for a while, and when he finally recovered, he could already see the West City gate in front of him. He looked ugly. Yinzhenqi. He stretched out his hand and pinched her waist. As a slave, you won't offend the master like you. Even if your mother is behind you, you are just a slave. If you answer the sun, the slave will save it. You save it. He gritted his teeth, and the strength in his hand increased. You are clearly not afraid. Do you think you can still catch up? The person behind him suddenly asked. Hua Yu smiled lightly. You don't have to worry, son, slaves have their own way. As long as the sky doesn't fall, anything can be turned around. She has this confidence. It's a pity. The fingers that were pinching her waist loosened one by one, and Li Jingyun's voice came from behind her ears with a bit of heat. This time, you may have no choice. What does this mean? Hua Yu was stunned, and before she had time to ask, the horse's hoof suddenly stepped into the mud pit, splashing a muddy water, and in the turbulence, she suddenly felt empty behind her. Something quickly fell back, and the wind rolled over from both sides, making her back feel cold. Hua Yu is the busiest servant in the entire general's mansion. When the sun rises, the general will be given soup and snacks, admonish the servants, and tidy up chores. After the sun goes down, there is not much free time. It is necessary to organize the preferences of the ladies and ladies for future use, and to count the account books for the day to balance the income and expenditure. These things will consume all her energy, no more than 2 hours of sleep a day. However, Hua Yu felt that even if 10 times more chores were added together, it would not be difficult for Li Jingyun to deal with it. The curtain hangs down, the doctor packs the medicine box and retreats. Li Jingyun leans on the soft pillow, his hair is loose, and his expression is lazy. Why didn't you hold it? The cat sighed like a mouse. Hua Yu knelt at the end of his bed, still showing him a soft smile. It's the slave's fault. Then when are you going to receive the punishment? It's too annoying to kneel here all the time. Hua Yu bowed her head to him. If you return to the sun, the general has an order to let the slaves first serve the sun with medicine. The medicine bowl on the low table beside the bed gave off a strong and bitter smell. Li Jingyun squinted and smirked. You made me fall off the horse. If you don't receive the punishment first, what medicine are you serving? I'm sorry to say. He is a gentleman anyway, so he jumped on the horse himself in order not to meet the Han family. If she really broke her leg, it would be fine, but she lay unharmed on the bed and pretended to be sick, which made the lady worry half to death. Li Jingyun pushed away the medicine bowl she handed over. I can't drink the medicine you brought. Don't drink if you can't drink it, you deserve it. Withdrawing the medicine bowl, Hua Yu continued to kneel meekly, stirring the spoon silently. What? He was a little impatient. you still want to rely on me to stay in the yard? Reply to the son's words. Hua Yu raised her eyes innocently, the son is seriously injured and there is no valet by his side. Beeb. Young master, be careful. She smiled, the doctor said, master is too frightened today and needs to rest. If you really let him rest, will she tie her Zhuang's dog over and keep barking? Li Jingyun was so angry that his eyes darkened. He doesn't like being followed, so there are only a few rough servants in the east courtyard, and there is no personal servant girl, and his father knows it. He also asked Yin Huayu to come over, so it was obvious that he wanted to monitor him. Glancing at the medicine bowl in Huayu's hand, Li Jingyun reached out and took it, raised his head and took a sip, frowning. Where's the preserves? Huayu got up, took out a pack of candied fruit from her sleeve pocket, opened it and handed it to him. To carry such a thing with you? Li Jingyun didn't start, and said angrily, I want to eat the candied plum blossoms from Jing'an, you go out to buy now. A few words, Li Jingyun got up. Where is your son going? To go to the toilet. He took 2 steps out, paused, and looked back in disbelief. Do you want to go to the toilet too? Huayu smiled and bowed to him, the slave is waiting outside. With a flick of her sleeves, Li Jingyun strode out, and Huayu followed suit, and didn't stop until she reached the entrance of the back hall. Out of the corner of the eye, he glanced behind him, he hummed softly, and after entering the back hall, he turned over from the adjacent courtyard wall, and fell silently to the base of the wall outside. It was just afternoon, and the mansion was busy cleaning up the mess after the Han family passed the mansion. There was no one on the trail outside. As long as you bypass the kitchen in front, you can sneak out through the back door. Just want to trap him in the house? No way. Li Jingyun looked around vigilantly, pointed her toes, and avoided all the slaves as light as a swallow. As soon as he touched the knocker of the back door, he breathed a sigh of relief, stood up straight and straightened his clothes for himself. In the end, he is the son of the general's mansion. What a pity, Mr. Yin. Breaking sympathy for her, Li Jingyun opened the back door with great interest. Son. Huayu stood outside the door, raised the rolled shampoo over her head, and handed it to him respectfully, please use it. Closing the door with a snap, Li Jingyun turned around and rubbed his eyes. Wrong? Yin Huayu was still in the east court just now, how could she run faster than him? He must have misunderstood. The voice sounded softly, Miss Han likes jasmine, this scent is also good, you might as well try it, son. Blinding half of her face, Li Jingyun threw the door open and said coldly, this son likes to kill, why don't you let Miss Han come and try? Miss Han said that the son is a treasure of the capital, and she likes whatever the son likes. Huayu smiled and bowed, if the son is interested, the slave will invite Miss Han to come. It's okay to try. Li Jingyun reached out and wiped his face. He thinks that these women are sick and unreasonable, so what's the benefit of begging Bela to marry him? He doesn't want to, the other party is also a guard when he enters the door, it is better to be at ease in the embroidered building. Besides, he has not yet established a career, why is he in a hurry to start a family? Having taken a half step out, Yin Huayu followed and stood in front of him, with a docile face, which was very attractive. Li Jingyun squinted, do you think the young master can't do anything about you? The slaves dare not. He said that he didn't dare, but he didn't let half an inch of his body. Li Jingyun laughed in anger and was too lazy to go out. He dragged her back and walked back, crossed the corridor, and saluted the house slave kicked open the door of the main hall. Didn't you say that the young master drank the medicine, and you came to receive the punishment? Throwing her into the yard, Li Jingyun sneered, let's take it, Lord Watch. Huayu staggered 2 steps to stand, smiled, and replied, yes. The people in the main office were stunned, and they didn't know what happened, but Sun Ma, who was in charge of the affairs, came up and asked, why did you come here in person? Li Jingyun raised her chin and pointed at Yin Huayu, her face gloomy. I'll leave it to you. Li Jingyun clapped his hands, be honest and send it back to me. Yes. However, as soon as Li Jingyun took a step outside, the hem of his clothes was grabbed. The fabric was wrinkled, and the fingers between them were long and soft, and they didn't seem to have much strength. He wanted to pull it back, but he couldn't. You let go. He glared at her. The slave received the punishment and was convinced. Huayu didn't look back, and the strength in her hand didn't loosen. Please do it. Li Jingyun was really happy. You take your punishment. What are you doing with the young master? Do you expect the young master to follow it for you? Huayu smiled lightly, turned her back to Mami Suan, turned her face to the side, her black and white almond eyes looked into his eyes. By the order of the general, this servant will not leave you half a step. After dragging and pulling, Li Jingyun gritted his teeth. Mother Suan, these slaves who have committed crimes, won't they still look good if they are not killed? Mother Suan smiled, and immediately someone brought a short whip to punish. In fact, she didn't need a short whip at first. Yin Zhang had done a lot of meritorious deeds, and he was protected by the general and his wife. But the young master came in person, and Yin Zhanshi didn't want to back down. Suan Ma was helpless and could only bite the bullet. Don't look at the sternness of Yin Zhanshi on weekdays, the body is really thin, and she can feel the sudden tightening of her flesh when the whip goes down. Spring shirts are already thin, no matter how light they will crackle. Huayu knelt up straight, motionless. Li Jingyun originally wanted to see a joke, even if she showed some embarrassment, he could feel a little more at ease. But no, until the sound of the whip died, Yin Huayu did not even frown except her face turning pale. Li Jingyun was very annoyed, he pulled back the hem of his clothes and walked out. Huayu stopped her without thinking, it's getting late, so I invite you back to the East Court for dinner. The purpose of sending her to be beaten is to beat her up so she can get away with it, but this person is still like nothing after the beating. He said these things that sounded annoying. Li Jingyun closed his eyes, gritted his teeth and returned to the East Courtyard. As soon as he turned around, the man behind him slumped his shoulders. Seeing this, Mami Suan hurriedly wanted to come up to help her, but as soon as she stretched out her hand, the man in front of him straightened his back, as if nothing had happened, and chased the young master out. Li Jingyun walked very fast, passing through the flower door all the way, without stopping for half a step, but the sound of the broken footsteps behind him was like a shadow, and he couldn't get rid of it. He walked more and more urgently, and in the end, he almost leaped into the gate of the East Courtyard with light effort. The voice behind you is gone. Li Jingyun was overjoyed, looked back at the empty alley, and smiled comfortably. He just said, there is no one who can move freely after being beaten, and it is not a monster. Son. Huayu came out of the East Courtyard and handed him the rolled shampoo, please use it. Yin Huayu is really a monster. Li Jingyun felt a headache. He looked at the whip under Mami Suan, and didn't save any effort. Her back was indeed swollen like a dromedary, and it didn't look easy. But even so, Yin Huayu stood in front of him, folded her hands, and saluted him with her hypocritical smile, young master. Sir, please eat. Young master, the wall is being built in front of you, and this road will not get you out of the house. You have worked hard to climb over the wall, please use champagne. Sir, the scent of jasmine is smoked on the top. Sir. He now wants to vomit when he hears the words young master. If I heard that I was going to visit the temple with Lao Shi's lady, Li Jingyun would definitely run out of the house overnight without a word, and come back when the trouble is over. But now, after being blocked back for the 6th time, he can only stand in the inner room with a dark face, at the mercy of Yin Huayu. Huayu familiarly fastened the buckle for him, and just tied a beautiful knot, he waved it away irritably. What is this wearing? Young Master Hui. Huayu smiled lightly, this is a new blue carp snow brocade robe, light in color, suitable for the spring outside, and the cutting materials are also first class. Respect it. Ugly. He gently smoothed the folds for him, Huayu's eyes full of admiration. It was chosen by the lady herself, and the slaves thought it was very beautiful. Different from the fake smirk before, when she said this, Yin Huayu in front of her had a light in her eyes, like the heart of a lake glistening on a sunny day, with light flowing and joyful. Her face was blushing, and the roots of her ears were slightly red. If she didn't look at her old-fashioned squirrel robe, she would be a young girl in love with peach blossoms. Li Jingyun was startled, then looked down at himself inexplicably. Really so good looking? Beating and beating, scolding and scolding, and now Yin Huayu suddenly shows this look to him. Li Jingyun feels uncomfortable. Don't start by saying coldly, be quicker with your hands and feet. Yes. Tie his hair into a bun for him. Huayu looked at the bronze mirror. The person in the mirror with sword brows and star eyes is really a good skin. If he looks like this, no matter how arrogant he is, Miss Han must be able to tolerate it. What is this? Li Jingyun grabbed her wrist in disgust. Is the Lord going to incense or parade to the public? Huayu held a Mandarin duck pendant and said with a smile, this is a pendant picked by Madam. Yesterday, Ballet Pavilion brought more than 20 pieces. Madam is only optimistic about this style. Rare. Li Jingyun couldn't understand what was so rare about a pair of birds. No. Young master, I'm going to see Miss Han today. This thing is going to be given away. If you wear it and take it off, it will be more sincere. There were 2 blue veins on the forehead. Li Jingyun slowly turned his head, his eyes were sharp. Is there any misunderstanding in Yinzhenshi? He promised to meet people, but he had already given 10,000 steps, and he still wanted to arrange for him to deliver this boring thing. Do you really think he is easy to talk? Huayu couldn't get him off, so she took the jade pendant with another hand, and softly persuaded, since you're going to go, why should you care about such a small matter? The index finger hooked over his belt, and the silk rope was pulled inward, and then passed through with the thumb, and a set of half was placed on the Mandarin duck. Huayu looked at it with satisfaction. Young master is a dragon and a phoenix, and he is full of chivalrous spirit, and if you wear such a piece of jade, you will have a complete set of swords and sons and daughters. It doesn't get any better. Li Jingyun, although Yin Huayu is really annoying, it's annoying to look at, but sometimes she speaks quite nicely. With a cold snort, he walked out with his sleeves, and the dromedary behind him followed. In a moment, outside the West City Gate. The Han family agreed to meet here, but after waiting for a long time, there was no sign of the carriage on the road. Li Jingyun has written impatience on his forehead. Huayu gently smiled and lowered the curtain of the car. Miss Han is a good-looking person praised by everyone in the Jinghua boudoir, and she has a unique virtue. It's okay to wait for her for a while. But this wait is half an hour. The birds and flowers are fragrant outside, and the carriage is dead silent. Li Jingyun swept his eyes gloomily, thinking that Yin Huayu would continue to laugh and say good things. Who would have thought that her face was uglier than his? It's a little bit too late for a stick of incense. She said coldly, but after so long, I didn't take my wife seriously. Li Jingyun was very puzzled. He was the one who waited for half an hour here, why didn't he cry for him, and he was mad at others for neglecting his wife? It really is the most loyal dog around Chuang. As soon as she was angry, Li Jingyun felt in a better mood. She put her hand on the back of her head and leaned against the wall of the car, and hummed, it seems that Miss Han doesn't want to go through the door of the general's mansion. Huayu glanced at him, thinking in her mind that Miss Han was infatuated with him, day and night thinking about how to get through the gate of the general's mansion. Unless something happened, she couldn't have come. My heart tensed for no reason. Huayu lifted the curtain of the car and instructed the driver, go in the direction of Hanfu. Yes. Li Jingyun is not happy. If they don't come, are you still rushing to pick them up? Sir, this servant is worried that something happened to Miss Han. You think everyone is as bad as you? Hua Yu smiled, her heart irritated. There will be retribution in the future. The car was quiet. Li Jingyun played with the pendant around his waist, and glanced at the person next to him from the corner of his eye. Yin Huayu turned to face him, the corners of her mouth raised rigidly, but there was no smile in her eyes, and her whole person looked cold and cold, like the fog rising in the morning during the frost season. She didn't speak anymore, and he didn't bother to speak, and the carriage continued to move forward staggeringly. The vicinity of the city gate is always lively. You can go in the direction of Hanfu, the more you go, the fewer people there are. The wheels rolled over the Qingxi Bridge, and a carriage suddenly appeared at the bridge entrance. The wind lantern of the Han house was hung on the eaves of the car, but the horse disappeared, and the driver was not seen, only the car was leaning forward and resting by the bridge. The secret passage made a bad sound, and Huayu stopped the car and hurried over to look. And a tuft of dark brown fluff. Pinching the weird fluff, Huayu heard the urging of evil obstacles behind her before she could take a closer look. Huayu turned around and seemed to curse. Li Jingyun raised her eyebrows novelly. What did you say? Send a letter to Hanfu. Is it because of her accident? Young Master Hui, no. Isn't it worth it? Li Jingyun sneered, the missed appointment has already made the young master very unhappy, and the master has to run errands for her. Huayu raised her head slowly, her eyes gradually filled with suspicion. Li Jingyun rolled his eyes, don't guess, the young master is not going to do anything to women. Young master also said, how could an accident happen at the foot of Emperor Jinghua? Huayu looked around, although there are few people here, it is not a place where no one passes by, and the carriage has been put on hold for a long time, and it is not seen. If an official is here, won't you find it strange, sir? Strange, very strange. Li Jingyun nodded in agreement, but what does this have to do with me? You are a slave, just listen to the master, where do you have so much trouble? Li Jingyun stretched out his hand and dragged her into the carriage, lazily instructing the driver, go home. As the curtain slowly fell, Li Jingyun glanced outside seemingly inadvertently. There are messy knife marks on the sloping carriage, and in the overlap, the tail of each smear is stubbornly floating to the left. He looked away. Huayu staggered and sat down on her knees in the car, wanting to scold, but finally said gently, Miss Han has admired the son for a long time, even for this kind of affection, the son should not be so indifferent. Oh! Li Jingyun leaned on the soft pillow, and didn't bother to lift his eyelids, which I do you see she admires me. The mind of the daughter's family is obvious. If you like someone and admire someone, your eyes will never leave him. Miss Han is in front of the sun, her eyes are always focused, and she must be looking at the sun from a distance. As long as the sun likes something, she will take care of it. Once the sun is injured, she can rush around the lobby several times. Huayu explained to him calmly, this is admiring the sun. Li Jingyun disagreed, she admires me, so I have to take care of her? As long as a smart person is rejected, he should know the proportions, and stalkers will naturally not be favored by others. Huayu laughed angrily. She knew that this little beast was heartless, but she never thought that she would be so indifferent. He could not even read the slightest affection. Li Jingyun squinted his eyes unpleasantly, are you blaming me? Young master, slaves don't dare. Then don't wait, let's go home. Holding a sigh of relief, Huayu bowed her head meekly, lifted the curtain of the car and told the driver. Miss Han's accident will not benefit the general's house in the slightest, and may even bring shame to the general's house. However, the Han family is a big family, and they have contacts with many court officials. Who dares to attack Miss Han in Beijing, and is so quiet? Huayu was puzzled and couldn't help but glance at Li Jingyun again. Li Jingyun darkened. He has never seen such a bold and presumptuous slave, what does he think of him? If he really wanted to do something, he made sure that there would be no cars left. I really want to send her to the director's house to be beaten again, so that the dromedary will turn into a double-humped camel. Sir, it's here. The carriage stopped at the east gate of the general's mansion, and Huayu suddenly brought him a footstool diligently, and helped him enter the door. Li Jingyun waved her hand in disgust. Master knows the way. Thinking about how bad things went over the wall yesterday, Li Jingyun thought it was justified, and followed her around the house. As a result, he walked into the place he didn't like the most. Madam, there is an accident on the road today. My son is afraid that my wife will be worried, so I have come to greet my wife. As soon as the threshold was passed, Yin Huayu's happy voice spread throughout the main courtyard. Li Jingyun froze and turned to leave. Huayu grabbed him. Her strength was suddenly several times stronger than before, and even if he didn't move his feet, she pulled out 2 long winding marks on the ground. Li Jingyun felt that Yin Huayu would not be able to get rid of the hatred in his heart for a day. In the face of Yin Huayu, Li Jingyun looked hateful and scheming, making people want to throw him out of Jinghua. But every time he sat in front of Mr. Zhuang, he was always taciturn and alienated. At this time, Huayu will be glad that Zhuang's eyes are not good. No matter how much Li Jingyun looks begging for beating, she can also gently say to Zhuang, "The flowers are blooming well today, son. Once the government said to come and see you." Zhuang was surprised and moved, pulled her sleeves and whispered, "Hurry up and serve him tea first." Huayu Ying yes, poured tea from the teapot to Li Jingyun at will, then cleaned the cup, drained the water into the pot, and served Zhuang's excellent Taiguanyan. Li Jingyun, he felt that Yin Huayu might not want to live anymore. Zhuang Shi smiled and rubbed the teacup in her hand, only vaguely saw the figure sitting on the chair of the master. She opened her lips and slowly closed it, hesitated for a long time, and then asked softly, Are you feeling better? It's great to go back to mother. Then, is the training ground okay? It's great to go back to mother. Are the trees in your yard blooming well? It's great to go back to mother. Nothing else to say, Mrs. Zhuang squeezed her skirt tightly. She really wants to get close to Jingyun, and also wants to hear her son act like a spoiled child, even if she complains about something, talk about what troubles she encounters every day, or what a happy event worth celebrating. But no, Jingyun never wanted to talk to her. Zhuang Shi sighed, smiled to himself, and touched his eyes. Madam. Huayu's smiling voice suddenly sounded next to her. On our way back, we passed Bailey Pavilion. The slave was in a hurry to come back to report, who knew that the young master suddenly fell in love with a magnolia hairpin. I have to ask the slaves to buy it back for you to see. Look, do you like it? The cool jade was smooth, and Mrs. Zhuang touched the outline. Her eyes brightened. Jingyun bought it. Yes. Looking at Li Jingyun with a stiff face, Huayu leaned close to Zhuang Shi's ear, and said softly, Our son is stubborn when he is a child, and he can't say anything on his face. Good words, but he always remembers what you like. The eye sockets were reddish. Zhuang rubbed the hairpin several times, and inserted it into the bun with trembling hands. Huayu took it and put it on for her, and said with admiration, Mrs. It's beautiful, but the young master has a unique vision. This magnolia and his wife match each other perfectly, and what she is holding is Tao Xiao Li Rang, and her elegance is unparalleled. Li Jingyun had a choked expression. He opened his mouth to say that this dog slave is nonsense, but as soon as his lips moved, Yin Huayu glanced at him. The eyes are cold and warning. Li Jingyun doesn't understand, why does a mere servant dare to stare at his master? But he didn't react for a while, just watched this man coax Mr. Zhuang into joy, and then came over and led him out. When did you buy the hairpin? He asked blankly. Young Master Hui, I have prepared it a while ago. Then why do you say I bought it? Master Hui, as long as you buy anything, Madam will like it. Nodding clearly, Li Jingyun finally regained his senses, grabbed her shoulders, and said, When you are a servant, when will you be able to decide for your master? Hua Yu folded her hands in front of her belly and let him hold her, smiling docilely. Young master taught me a lesson. Don't hang up your appearance to the Lord, it's useless. Li Jingyun sneered, it's quite fun to stare at the Lord inside, and you pinch your tail when you leave the master. Young master taught me a lesson. Do you think that someone is supporting you, so you don't take your father seriously? Yin Huayu, you come to my yard, you are my person, I can find a reason to throw you into the palm of the day. 3 times in the hospital. Huayu was stunned, and then nodded, young master taught me a lesson. Blue veins burst out of the forehead. Li Jingyun was furious, don't use this scene to perfunctory, listen to it, it will make people angry. The smile on her face faded a little. Yin Huayu raised her eyes and looked at him. The mother and son still speak perfunctory scenes, master and servant why can't they say it? Have you taught him a lesson? Li Jingyun gritted his teeth, pinched her chin and approached her. The dog that was sent to someone, still barking for the original owner, is loyal enough. Since you are protecting your wife like this, why don't you go back to the main courtyard? If possible, she would also like to go back to the main house. Huayu lowered her eyes and glanced behind her unwillingly, but after just one look, she calmed down. Young master, car and horses are tired, I'd better go back to the east court to change clothes and wash. Li Jingyun felt very annoyed. This person in front of him was like a ball of cotton, no matter how hard he tried, he could not crush her, but it was her, a few soft words, which made him furious. Have to find a way to treat her. When it was free, Li Jingyun went to the main courtyard to pick up a servant, and asked in confusion, do you remember when Yin Zhenqi entered the general's mansion? The little servant thought for a while, it's been 3 years. 3 years ago, a group of servants were sent out from the palace, and 10 were received by the palace, and the matter in charge of Yin was among them. I actually worked as a servant in the palace. Li Jingyun pouted and asked, what are her daily preferences? The little minion scratched her head laboriously, if you want to talk about preferences, Yin Zhang really doesn't have anything to do, she works every day, busy and busy. But she is paid monthly, but I will go to the Bora Pavilion. Bora Court is a famous jewelry store in Jinghua. She spends all her monthly money on it. Li Jingyun wondered that she had never seen any good jewelry on her head on weekdays. Remembering the magnolia hairpin that Yin Huayu touched out of thin air that day, Li Jingyun paused and suddenly had a bright light. Huayu came back from the backyard to draw water, and saw Li Jingyun standing by the corridor waiting for her. What's your son's order? She held the bucket cautiously. Li Jingyun stretched and said very naturally, Master has an appointment with someone tonight. If you go back to the sun, the general has an order. If you pretend that you didn't see it, the Lord tomorrow will buy the jewelry from the Ballet Pavilion and deliver it to the main courtyard in person. The pupils shrank suddenly, and Huayu raised her head in a daze. He, Mrs., took the initiative to send jewelry? Died. But now, what did she hear? The man in front of him turned his face to the side, his eyes narrowed slightly, showing a little impatient, noticing her gaze, his head did not move, his eyes turned slightly back, and he smiled at her, the general's order and the lady's happiness, which is more important? Yin Huayu's face was very wonderful for a moment. She is an obedient slave. Even if Madame came to talk to her, she would never be able to show favoritism as the person in charge. After a while, a slightly hoarse voice sounded in the corridor. How long will the sun be going? Huayu wanted to put the bucket in his hand on his head, of course she just thought about it. Waiting patiently for this grandfather to laugh enough, she bent her knees and asked again, how long is the sun going? 1 hour. Li Jingyun wiped the tears from her laughter and stretched her index finger, I will be back in 1 hour, I promise not to be discovered. Huayu thought about it for a moment and said, Mrs. Hairpin, please bring back a hairbrush, I want a magnolia flower style. After a pause, she added, it would be better if there was a step. Li Jingyun really didn't expect to be able to open the door from here, and he had vowed not to disobey the general's orders before, and now he is giving him water in a serious manner. You go out from Zixiaomen at the end of Yushimo, and be sure to come back before Hai Shi. Zixiaomen has a dog. Before coming back, I'd like to ask the son to throw a stone at the courtyard wall, so that the servant will help him. Young master, do you understand? Perhaps his eyes were too teasing. Yin Huayu was finally annoyed, pursed her lips, and her tone became cold. If someone finds out, the slave will immediately lead someone to capture the son. It's ruthless. Li Jingyun sighed and felt funny again. Yin Huayu is like an emotionless knife, she is used to being sharp and cold, and it can block people everywhere. But suddenly there was a little weakness, and it seemed like he had changed back to a living person. For a moment, he wanted to reach out and touch her white and high neck. But this action might make her face water. Li Jingyun shook his head and retracted his hand regretfully. Youth. A carriage came to the west gate of the general's mansion, paused for a moment, and then drove on the official road. Qin Sheng was sitting in the car, looking outside the car and looking back at the people sitting next to him. Li Jingyun gave birth to a very handsome skin. But right now, young master laughed so much, the carriage went all the way, he laughed all the way, his ink eyes glowed, and the corners of his lips were raised. Young master. Qin Sheng couldn't stand it any longer. What's the happy event in the house? Li Jingyun squinted at him. Master is locked up so moldy, what can be a happy event? Then what are you enjoying? Wiping his face, Li Jingyun was inexplicable. Who's happy? I'm annoying, I can only come out for an hour, and I'll rush back later. Qin Sheng looked left and right, struggling to convince himself that he was dazzled, and then asked, the general has been busy with the arsenal recently, do you still have time to watch you in person? It's not him. Li Jingyun curled his lips, there's a dog in the yard, much better than my father. The dog had sharp teeth, sharp claws, and a sharp nose, which almost delayed his event. Yes. Just now, her face turned green with anger. Recalling Yin Huayu's expression at that time, Li Jingyun couldn't hold back, and burst out laughing. Qin Sheng. Huayu was guarding the east courtyard with a green face. She knew that Li Jingyun had a deviant temperament. If he had to go out, he would definitely not do good things, but he was rarely willing to take the initiative to see his wife. She seemed to be worth it. Take care of the chores in the east courtyard. Huayu stepped on the corridor to the main courtyard, facing a servant with her head bowed. When the two passed by, Huayu heard her say softly, that one left the palace today. After taking a step, Huayu's face sank. Where? There is not enough manpower to keep up with it, and I only received wind. Caillou sighed and continued walking. In charge. The little girl wanted to stop her, but when she looked back, the thin shadow had reached the end of the corridor. The wind blows the bamboo, and the courtyard is cold. Out of the corridor, Huayu turned back into a considerate servant, and respectfully sent the freshly baked soup to the general's study. Li Xiaotian was busy, took time to look at her, and asked, what's wrong with Jingyun? Return to general, everything is fine, young master is resting in the yard. Huayu felt a little guilty, saluted the general, and hurriedly exited to look at the sky. The sky is gradually dyed with ink, and the lamps in the house are also lit up one by one. Hours of time. The appointed time has passed, and there is not even a figure at the west gate. Huayu's face is not very good looking. She knew she couldn't believe Li Jingyun's deceitful mouth. She really lost her way. The old fisherman capsized in the gutter and suffered so many losses. Gritting her teeth, she broke off a piece of steamed bun. Huayu fed it to Wangfu, who was sitting by the door, and said on the side of her yin side, when you meet someone, don't worry about 3721, bite him first. Meet down. Wangfu is the most vicious watchdog in the whole government. He has caught thieves several times over the walls and courtyards. It is not very close to the servants in the house on weekdays, and it is only willing to eat what Huayu feeds, so Huayu instructs it, and it immediately wows, its ears stand up, and its tail wagging. Looking at the bright little eyes, Huayu couldn't help holding its two front paws. Dogs are still human, but some people don't do good deeds. If he is half obedient to you, I can live 2 years longer. Before he finished speaking, a stone was thrown from the wall. Huayu reacted very quickly, got up and took 2 steps back. The stone landed in front of her and rolled away. Patting her chest for relief, she casually raised her eyes, but suddenly her pupils shrank. The moon tonight is big and round. It looks like a shadow play curtain on the top of the wall. The branches from the side cut some cracks in the curtain, and someone suddenly jumped out of it supporting the top of the wall. A blue carp snow brocade robe was smashed by the wind, and the koi carp on the top was alive. The sleeve robe flew over, curled a few strands of ink hair. Where the ink hair brushed, Li Jingyun he looked down at her, mocking and annoyed. If she had not been prepared, she would have broken 2 bones. Gritting her teeth, she took him in her arms. She took a deep breath and forced a smile. Master. The wide sleeve robe dangled from both sides of her shoulders. Li Jingyun slowly rested her chin on her shoulders, and exhaled softly. You have a lot of opinions on the Lord. Young master is joking. Huayu reluctantly asked for compensation. It is a blessing for a slave to serve the sun, so how dare you be disobedient? With a snort, he reached out and touched her hot earlobe. Lie. Huayu scolded her stomach and did not dare to say a word. Wang Fu, who was next to him, was so frightened by this sudden man from heaven that his hair stood on end. Wang Fu froze in place, a suspicious ow. A dagger swiped to the front of it, and it was cold in the moonlight. Li Jingyun turned his head to look at it, licked his lips and said, Master is just hungry, is there any meat to eat here? Wang Fu, the exposed fangs were obediently retracted, and Wang Fu sat in the corner, silent. Li Jingyun laughed, this stern, your relative. Huayu also wanted to break him into pieces to feed to relatives. Excuse me, sir, stand. She pushed him, it's getting late, it's time to go back to the east courtyard. Li Jingyun hummed, with a heavy nasal voice, Master can't walk. He pouted, you are so ruthless. She didn't bother to talk to him anymore. She took his hand off her shoulders forcefully, and wanted him to go back to the east court. However, as soon as she pinched his cuff, something sticky and fishy quickly stained her hands. Huayu was stunned for a moment. She lowered her head and wanted to borrow the moonlight to see what it was, but before she could see clearly, someone in the distance yelled angrily, who is over there? Several torches came close to the west gate in an instant. The light was so bright that the eyes hurt. Wang Fu, who had already nestled in the corner, jumped out again and barked at Li Jingyun. Li Jingyun, this dog, who sees the wind, is indeed a relative of Yin Huayu. But at a glance who was standing in front of him, he didn't even have the desire to move his legs. And NBSP, it is a prophecy. Pictured his lips, Li Jingyun stretched out his hands and handed them to Yin Huayu. Amid the flames, Huayu was a little distracted, but after a moment, she turned around to meet the nursing home. Shang Yin. Seeing that it was her, the nursing home stopped. It's so late, why are you here? Young master can't sleep in the middle of the night, I'll accompany him out for a walk. Huayu glanced at Wang Fu and sighed, it's night, and it hasn't been on alert yet. It treats the sun as a bad guy. Li Jingyun raised her head in surprise. The man in front of him had a straight back, and when he looked from behind, he could just see her red-hot earlobes. Do you need the younger ones to send the young master back? No, you guys continue to patrol, and I will lead the sun back to the east court. Yes. The nurses scattered back and forth one step at a time. Huayu turned around, and reached out to the person leaning in the shadows. Her fingers were slender and soft, and looked extra gentle in the moonlight. Li Jingyun's eyes were full of disbelief. Aren't you going to bring someone to arrest me? Hua Yu smiled and said, Young master, the ribs that fell on the table, as long as they can be picked up, will not be thrown to the ground. You dare say that you are pork ribs? Ow! Wang Fu tilted his head and looked at the man in front of him with a puzzled look, thinking that it didn't look like beautiful and delicious spare ribs. Hua Yu patted its head, then passed over it, grabbed Li Jingyun's arm, and put it on her shoulder. What are you doing? Hua Yu supported him and pressed most of his body on top of her. The servant will lead you back to the yard. There was something strange in her heart. Li Jingyun followed her reluctantly, running vaguely on her mouth. Yin's and she took the wrong medicine. Do you want the young master to accept his favor? If you want to, say it directly. Lord is not a stingy person. Why are you walking so slowly? Your legs aren't broken. Why are you waiting for dawn? Caillou didn't reply a word. When she returned to the east courtyard, closed the door of the main house, Hua Yu went to the cabinet to find the medicine box, and knelt down beside his bed. Li Jingyun's face was instantly wonderful, colorful. When was it discovered? Hua Yu lowered her head and stirred the powder, at the side of the courtyard wall. He was a little annoyed. Then you don't say a word on the road, waiting to see my joke. She raised her eyes. You don't have to be shy, son. Shy? I'm so shy. Saying so, but the whole handsome face is clearly written with anger and anger. Too lazy to be stubborn with him, Hua Yu directly took his hand, rolled up the cuffs for him, and said warmly while dipping the medicine, serving the son is what a servant should do, the son does not need to mind. It's not uncommon for men to be injured outside, there's nothing to hide. My heart skipped a beat. She glanced at him. Replenish your body. Rolling up his sleeves calmly, Hua Yu took the medicine and applied it around the wound. Li Jingyun said impatiently, apply the medicine, just apply the medicine, whatever you blow, master is not a 3-year-old child who is afraid of pain. That's what he said, but the hair that exploded all over his body finally smoothed out a little bit. He leaned on the soft pillow angrily, and with a glance out of the corner of his eye, he saw Yin Huaya who was lying down because the back of the neck is exposed. This life is white, even if the candle light illuminates her light orange, she does not feel warm when she looks at it. With her uninjured hand, she touched the jade pendant on the hook of the sleeping tent. The tentacles of the white jade were cold. It's hot? The warm touch spread from his fingertips to his heart. Li Jingyun paused. As if he didn't respond, the dark pupils were covered with a layer of mist, and the eyelashes trembled slightly. It felt so strange, he didn't even understand what was going on. He saw Yin Huayu's face close at hand. Huayu held the medicine bottle and looked at him coldly. Li Jingyun felt an inexplicable chill down her spine. He let go of his hand without a trace, turned his head to one side, paused, and urged slightly annoyed, isn't it ready yet? The fire burned red, young master has to endure it for a while. Li Jingyun's eyes widened, what do you want to do? 2 stitches are enough. Hua Yu threaded the thread skillfully, young master is a man who can stand up to the sky, can endure swords, how can you be afraid of this little thing? You are not afraid of needles, but you. He frowned, you are not a doctor. Hua Yu shook her head, the slaves are familiar with this, so please rest assured. The words fell, and without waiting for him to continue struggling, he turned around and clamped half of his arm with his arm, exposed the wound to the candlelight, and dropped the needle swiftly. Li Jingyun sucked in a breath of cold air, anger and pain, want to shout, manly man, shameful. But bear with it, it's really painful. Yin Huayu turned her back to him, determined to ignore his struggles. Li Jingyun snorted, opened his mouth to reveal his fangs, and bit her shoulder fiercely. The aroma of this man's body filled his nose. Li Jingyun loosened his strength after biting, and looked up uncomfortably. The man in front of him was staring intently at his wound, eyebrows slightly wrinkled, eyes narrowed. This person's pupils are actually light brown, looking at the light, like a piece of amber. He stretched out his hand and wanted to touch it again, but Li Jingyun recovered in time this time, glared at his hand, thinking, what is wrong with this, why do you always want to touch others? Where did the sun go tonight? The dog said human words. Li Jingyun pouted, you are a servant, do you understand that the less you know, the longer you live? Young master left the house today, it was the fault of the slave and the slave. Returning with injuries is also the responsibility of the slave. The slave should ask. Then why don't you just hand me over? The slave is afraid that the lady will be worried. Sure enough. Li Jingyun thought it was funny, you are now the maid in my yard, as long as the Lord is willing, you can always stay in this east yard, you should also learn to regard the Lord as your master. Caillou rolled her eyes. After a slight choking, he squeezed her chin with an angry smile, are you blind? Young master, be careful with your hands. Hua Yu smiled, the servant girl just has a pain in her eyes, and she doesn't mean to despise the sun. Not only blind, but stupid. Withdrawing the bandaged arm, Li Jingyun gritted his teeth, you can go out. Slowly packed up the bottles and jars by the bed, Hua Yu raised her eyes and asked, where did the sun buy? For a moment, Li Jingyun's arrogance disappeared, and he turned his head away with a guilty conscience. Hua Yu stared at him for a moment, her face suddenly darkened, young master. It's a long story, and it's not my fault. He said vaguely, something happened on the way back, and I didn't have time to go to Ballet Pavilion. Young master agreed to a slave when he went out. I'm going to buy it too, who would have thought? Li Jingyun pouted, if you don't want me to go out again tomorrow. Caillou smirked and pointed at the carved door, then shook her head firmly. No way. Going out once is not enough, do you want to go out a second time? What is she? Is it the waist card of the general's mansion? Young master is resting. She stood up and saluted, the servant is waiting outside the door. At what he was about to say, Yin Huayu quickly closed the door. Boom, with some anger. Li Jingyun really wanted to pull her back and beat her, how could someone slap her face? Even if he made a mistake first, there is no such arrogant servant as her. Isn't it just a broken hairpin, when should I buy it or not? Lying down angrily, Li Jingyun looked at the bow on his arm with disgust, and was silent for a while, and finally decided to find someone to go to Ballet Pavilion tomorrow to let this grinning dog calm down. In the end, before he could move, Yin Huayu moved first. Eastern Courtyard, everyone knows that this young man has a serious wake-up spirit, no matter who calls him, he will be smashed. Huayu has always been sensitive, and she can dodge the hand pillows and pillows he threw. Pendant. But this morning, Huayu did not hide. She took Li Jingyun's favorite 8 horses, and quickly and accurately took the mahogany hand pillow. Turn around for a week and a half, full marks, landing posture, full marks, sincere smile, full marks. It's just a hole in the 8 horses. Li Jingyun finally woke up, opened his eyes and almost passed out from anger. What are you doing? Huayu touched the 8 horses with great pity, and when she heard the sound, she looked at him reproachfully, what is the sun doing? Me. This picture is the handwriting of Master Tang, and the general spent a lot of effort to buy it back for you. Quanjinghua is just like this one, in terms of fine brushwork and mounting, it is a treasure among treasures, how can you give it up smashed? Li Jingyun was very puzzled, did I smash it? Huayu looked at the few rough servants standing behind her, and the witnesses nodded, it was the sun who smashed it. No matter how unhappy the young master is when he wakes up early, he can't smash it on the painting. It's a pity. Li Jingyun was confused for a moment, and his expression gradually became hideous. Are you waiting for an opportunity to take revenge on me? Young master. Huayu's eyes were full of disbelief, how could you have such an idea? Slaves serve masters with all their hearts, and naturally everything is the master of masters. If this painting is not the treasure of masters, slaves I wouldn't care so much. Her eyes were so sincere that Li Jingyun began to doubt herself. Did she really think wrong? In the blink of an eye, he ate the breakfast she brought and stretched his stomach for half an hour. Li Jingyun was very happy. One mountain cannot tolerate two tigers, even one male and one female. There is no need to buy the hairpin, he and Yin Huayu will never die. In the spring, the sky is bright and the air is clear, and the flowers are in full bloom in the general's mansion, but the eastern courtyard is filled with gunpowder smoke and the atmosphere is solemn. Huayu has more work to do. Basically she is going in the direction of exhausting her, but she is not stupid. No, I can't let this grandpa see the joke even if I can't bear it. Li Jingyun was not to be outdone, and tossed her in different ways. In order to appear stylish, he also specially asked people to find masterpieces such as Wei Liang torture collection and former Wei prison for reference. The east courtyard, which was always cold and quiet, suddenly became lively. In a few days, Miss Han's birthday will arrive. According to reliable sources, Miss Han has returned to the mansion and has also handed an invitation to the general's mansion. Li Jingyun was lying in the courtyard with Erlang's legs crossed. After listening to the message, he spat out the orange seeds in his mouth and sneered, "No. I'm not free." Qin Sheng wondered, "I haven't seen you for a long time to go to the training ground. It's been a few days, and the injury should be healed. What is your son busy with?" Looking sideways to a corner of the yard, Li Jingyun pouted very unhappily. Qin Sheng followed his gaze and saw Yin Zhenqi who was weeding with a bowl of water. What is she doing?" Qin Sheng was puzzled. Practice. Yin Zhang's magic is unparalleled in the world, the bowl of water on his head cannot spill even half a drop all day, what else do you need to practice? Qin Sheng was full of admiration, and then asked curiously, what would happen if it was spilled? It won't work. Li Jingyun chewed the orange and said, just go to the head office to get 10 whips. Qin Sheng, Li Jingyun looked left and right, very uncomfortable. Do you have any way to fix her? Young master, Yin Zhang is a female class, what do you care about her? What is it? A girl. Li Jingyun turned Qin Sheng's head in the direction of Yin Huayu, and said in disbelief, do you know what kind of monster she is? Put it in the training ground, then it's just a fall, swords and spears cannot penetrate, and the 5 poisons cannot invade. What about? As soon as his eyes rolled, Qin Sheng said righteously, young master, this subordinate has a good idea. Miss Han, who disappeared inexplicably, is back. Although Huayu was curious about what happened that day, as a servant, she would not talk too much, she only changed clothes and hair for Li Jingyun, and prepared gifts. This young man is rare and obedient, without any mischief. Caillou is not used to it. Young master. She whispered, the general ordered you to give the gift to Miss Han yourself. Yes. Li Jingyun nodded, neither struggling nor resisting. Huayu felt something was wrong. Young master, don't you think otherwise? What opinion can I have? He stretched out his arms and put on the robe she handed over, closed the placket, and squinted, it must be done, and it can't be pushed away. How can you grow so much overnight? Huayu thought it was strange, but she was happy. If he was willing to obey, then she would save trouble. Opening the jewelry box, Huayu looked for it and wondered, why is the Mandarin duck pendant worn by the son that day in the house gone? Li Jingyun followed and took a look, not paying attention, if you don't see it, it will disappear. It's not a good thing, it's very vulgar. That is the precious white jade of Bailey Pavilion. It was carved by a good craftsman. It is not a good object in his mouth. Huayu sighs, it's really Zuman's own wine and meat stink, and they take the pearl around their waist for hunting. Changed a 7 bamboo ring and put it on him, Huayu was about to turn around to pack up, when he grabbed her wrist unexpectedly. You have to go out with your father today, you can't lose your face. Looking up at her empty bun, Li Jingyun pinched something on her head in disgust. Where? Huayu was stunned for a moment, and when she touched it, she bumped into something cold. Panzu and jade leaf hairpin, and his 7 bamboo link is a set. Li Jingyun thinks it is feminine, and has never worn it. Hey, don't pick it, things are expensive, so I'll borrow you to support the scene today. He took her hand down, looked left and right. Remember to return it to me when you return home. I said so. Huayu gave up and wore it honestly. The Zhuang family usually does not go out, and the general also speculated that there was something wrong in the DPRK today, so the only one who went to the Han residence was Li Jingyun's carriage. However, the Han family's wife and the eldest princess are on good terms, and there are naturally many people who come to celebrate her beloved daughter's birthday, and several side doors are crowded with carriages and servants. Huayu thought it would take a while to get in. Who would have thought that as soon as their car stopped, a little maid came running and led them to the east side, which was closed and no one was their door. My lady said that the young master of the Li family is like a dragon and a phoenix, and he must not be in the same boat as the fish and shrimp. She will open this door for the sun. The little girl smiled sweetly and spoke well. Sweet enough to pinch out honey. Huayu couldn't help sighing. This year's scalp is really valuable. Even if Li Jingyun has a bad temper, Miss Han is willing to open her heart to him. She glanced at the man next to her subconsciously. Li Jingyun didn't look at the little girl who was talking, but leaned on the side of the car and looked at her with a focused expression. Seeing her looking over, he didn't avoid it. The light in his black pupils flowed, and there was no deep meaning. Huayu shivered inexplicably. The east door opened. Brother Jingyun. Han Chuang rushed out like a small butterfly, stopped before him, and saluted happily. You are coming. Huayu just glanced at her and knew that she must have been dressed for a long time today. Looking at Li Jingyun again, he was born very well, with trimmed temples and eyebrows, and tall and straight. The golden boys. Unfortunately, it didn't take a while for this master to speak. I'm here to give you a gift. Huayu wanted to slap a stick at the back of his neck. Specially prepared your favorite snacks. Li Jingyun followed her 2 steps and stopped, turned her head and looked behind her. Huayu. The slave is here. What are you doing? Breakfast is useless, and you want to be hungry outside. Huayu is surprised, this master still cares whether she is hungry or not, who was the person who starved her for several times before. She answered yes. She followed in small steps, wanting to follow Li Jingyun into the door. In the end, Li Jingyun looked at her for a moment, but went to her side and frowned and asked, Are you feeling unwell? Master Hui, no. Why is the color of your lips so light? You didn't sleep well last night. Huayu glanced at him inexplicably. Master Hui, this servant slept very well. Li Jingyun looked her up and down, his eyes fell on the bamboo and jade leaf hairpin on her head, and he suddenly smiled. Han Chuang followed, and her eyes changed instantly. Huayu's eyes twitched slightly and she took a half step back. What are you hiding? Li Jingyun was puzzled, turned to look at Han Chuang, who was blushing, and suddenly said, Miss Han can't even tolerate a servant. You can hear her grievance at the end of the sound. Then do you want to invite her in for dim sum? Okay, okay. She turned to look at Huayu, her eyes were a little sad. Please come in. Li Jingyun smiled and waved to Huayu, come come come. It's like calling for a blessing. Huayu gritted her teeth, walked over holding her hands, lowered her head and said softly, Young master, don't care about slaves. Li Jingyun didn't seem to hear, lowered her head and asked softly, What do you want to eat? The slave is not hungry. The Lord loves you, so you go on, what are you worried about? Li Jingyun raised his eyebrows and glanced around, or you don't like it here, then the Lord will accompany you to Jing'an Hall. Huayu could feel Miss Han's gaze, resentment and sting. She felt like a sweet and sour fish in a pot, with sugar being sprinkled on her body and oil being tormented under her body. Are you tired of standing and not talking? He hooked at her, come and sit down and let the Lord see. The sweet and sour fish was already fried. Huayu turned her back to Miss Han and looked at him with a hideous smile. Using a knife to kill, kills two birds with one stone. Where, there are 100,000 volumes of military books. Badness. Huayu gritted her teeth. There were sparks in her eyes, and she wanted to jump up and bite off a piece of Li Jingyun's meat, but in the eyes of Miss Han, this was not the case. Huayu raised her head and stared at Jingyun and didn't let go. He wasn't annoyed, he was laughing, tapping his knuckles, his ink pupils glowed, and there was a gentle pet in his eyebrows that he didn't even notice. Drowning. This is what Han Shuang has never seen before. Han Shuang felt aggrieved. She waited for brother Jingyun for so long, but he never looked at her again after entering the door. What is this? Indifferent, with warning.